What's up guys, Jay at Primal Project, and today we're talking about 3 principles that if you follow, you will achieve your fat loss goal 100% of the time. Okay, so today we're talking about the 3 principles that, based on my experience, if you do follow these 3 principles and really nail them, you will always achieve your fat loss goal. So principle number 1 is you need to make sure you are in an energy deficit. So that means you are consuming less calories than your body is burning. If you're not in an energy deficit, you're just not going to achieve your goal. You're not going to lose weight, you're not going to lose body fat. So how do you find out, number 1, what your total daily energy expenditure is? That is basically how much your body is burning just being at rest, just sitting here. How much energy does my body burn through per day? Because when you know that answer, all you do from there is just drop below that, about 300 to 600 calories. So finding that can be a little bit confusing and a little bit time consuming, but once you know the number, then you know where you can get started from. So the best way to do this is use a simple app like MyFitnessPal, which is one of the quite common ones used on Android or iPhones. MyFitnessPal, literally you put in your food, what you're consuming every day, and it'll give you a number at the end of the day as to roughly how many calories you are consuming. So what you want to do is track this over the space of 1 to 2 weeks, and then get an average daily intake and compare that to what your weight's doing. So if your weight stays the same, then you know that roughly your TDEE, which is total daily energy expenditure, what that average is pretty much what your body is going to be burning every day at rest. So from there, all you'd need to do is drop somewhere around 300 to 600 calories below that per day, and then you'll slowly see that weight starting to come down over time. Principle number 2 is you need to make sure your protein intake is high. So if your goal is fat loss, on average your protein intake should make up about 40 to 45% of your overall energy intake. Again, for most people you won't really know what this means. So again, you can use something like MyFitnessPal. You can track. There's a little tab down the bottom. Once you get into the application, you'll see you can click on nutrition and it'll tell you what your daily breakdown of what we call macronutrients is per day. So carbohydrates, protein, and fat. You need that protein number to be somewhere around 40 to 45% of your overall energy intake. And if you've never really tracked this sort of stuff before, you'll probably find that this number is really high compared to what your protein intake is at the moment. If you're not doing things like weight training, where you've probably got some idea that your protein intake needs to be higher. So what does this protein do? So protein, 1, is going to help look after, repair, and rebuild your muscle, which you want to keep for the long term. If you're in a deficit and your protein intake is low, there's a good chance that over time you're going to lose a lot of your muscle at the same time, and you don't want that. You just want to lose your body fat. So 1, it's going to help look after your muscle. Number 2, it's very satiating, so it's actually going to help fill you up a lot more than something like a carbohydrate food would. So if you can get a lot of protein into your diet, it's going to really reduce that risk of snacking all day on other foods, because you're not really being filled up, particularly if you're eating a lot of processed carbohydrates or refined foods. What's happening is as soon as you eat those foods, probably 1 to 2 hours later, you're going to be hungry again. So protein's just a really good way to keep you full throughout the day. Also with protein is it has a really high thermic effect. So when you do consume protein, your body actually requires a lot of energy just to break that protein down to be used as energy. So that's a little added bonus that you get. Somewhere around about 25% of that protein you consume automatically is going to be burnt off just in the digestion process. Okay, so that's another benefit that you get if protein is high. Your typical sources for protein are things like meats, eggs, seafood. If you're vegan, vegetarian, things like beans and nuts as well can have a fair amount of protein in them. And the 3rd principle that you need to be sticking to, and to be honest, if you don't nail this one, the other 2 aren't going to work for you anyway, and that's adherence. So you need to be sticking to something that you can follow for the long term. So if you start, and this is why most diets fail, because it's a type of diet that is so far foreign from what you've been doing for the past 10, 15, 20 years, that all of a sudden, you know, for example, you've been told to go on this vegetable diet where all you're eating is vegetables, when in your old diet that you've been following for 20 years, you never even had vegetables in it. So the chances of you maintaining or sticking to a vegetable diet is 0%. So it's looking for something that's going to work with you. And this is the biggest problem that people have, because they start off with something that they're not going to follow for the long term anyway. So it's looking for something that you feel like you can maintain for the long term, because it will take that to create those habits. So an example would be, if you're having, for example, at the moment, if you're having Nutella on toast for breakfast, which isn't the best way to start the day, but let's say that's where your old diet's at. An example of maybe changing a few things would be, maybe let's bring in a couple of eggs to put on the toast instead of Nutella. Number one, we're going to get some added protein in there that Nutella was probably not giving us. Two, it's going to help keep us full for a hell of a lot longer than what Nutella on toast would. Okay, so that's one little example of how we go from checking what our old diet was and start to incorporate some new changes that are going to help us in the long run. So if you follow those three principles, number one, just to summarize, was making sure you're in an energy deficit. So you need to find out what that is in the first place, what your TDEE is. Using an app like MyFitnessPal will do that for you. Step number two is protein intake. You need to make sure your protein intake is high enough to, one, look after your muscle. Number two, it's going to help keep you full for a long time. So it's going to increase your odds of actually achieving that calorie deficit. And step number three, you need to make sure you can follow it for the long term. So if you can't follow it for the long term, there's no point in even starting, because it's going to be just a standard yo-yo diet where you follow it for 8 weeks, lose a couple of kilo, and then go back to what you used to eat anyway and put it all back on with the increase of calories. So they're my 3 tips. It works 100% of the time if you can follow it. So if you found some value in this, definitely hit the subscribe button. I'll be bringing out a lot more of these videos over the next few weeks, definitely related around fitness, nutrition, and particularly fat loss if that's one of your big goals. If you've got any questions around this video, anything doesn't make sense, or you want clarification on something, definitely comment below and I can have those questions answered for you. Also, jump over to Instagram at Primal Project and you can follow me in the Instagram stories there, where we're dropping this type of information 24/7. So until the next video, I'll see you next time.